In this video, we're going to work on the following problem. It says, using the model view controller pattern, write a JavaFX application that allows the user to enter a number of minutes, converts it both to decimal hours and decimal days, both rounded to one decimal place, and then displays the results to the user. As an example, 6,000 minutes equals 100 hours and 4.2 days. The data entered by the user should be stored in the model class. So first off, I'm going to open up Scene Builder, and then I'm just going to go with pane on this one as the root component. And then I'm going to need some labels. A text field. And then a couple of other labels here. One to display the hours, and then another to display the days. And I'll move these in a little closer, these labels. Okay, so here, this one I want it to say minutes. This label, hours. And this one, days. All of those are static. They're not going to change, so I don't need to give them FX IDs or anything like that. However, this text field, I do need to set an FX ID on that one since I need to control it. So I'm going to call it minutes field. And then for its on action, handle minutes field. And then this label here, I want nothing in it right off the bat. So I'm just going to clear the text out of there. And then I'm going to call this hours label. So give it an FX ID of hours label. This one I also want to control. I'm going to call this one days label. Again, no on action. I need to clear this out, the text out, and set it to nothing. Okay, so that's how it should look. Next up, I need to set the controller. I'm going to call it minutes, hours, days controller. And then take a look at the sample controller skeleton and then save that. Okay. And I'm just going to generate CSD and remove CSD to make it align with the spacing and how JGrasp does it. So that should compile. Okay, so next up I need to go with the basic app. So import javafx.application.application, import javafx.stage.stage, import javafx.scene.scene, import javafx.scene.layout.pane, because I chose pane as the root component, and then javafx.fxml.fxml loader, and then java.io.io exception. All right, and then make the class, so public class minutes, hours, days, app, extends application. And inside that class, I need to implement the start method. Okay, and inside there, I need to create the main, the root component. So that's root. And if it's fxml loader.load, and then get class dot get resource, and then the name of the fxml file, minutes, hours, days, fxml.fxml. Once I do that, then I can create the scene that the root component is going to reside in, and then I can set the scene for the stage to that new scene I created. I'm going to set a title. For the main window, and then stage.show. That should show. And then here, right, it says unreported exception, IO exception must be caught or declared to be thrown, right? So this throws a checked exception, IO exception. It's subject to the catch or declare rule, and just to keep things easy for right now, I'm just going to declare it up here. All right, so that runs. I'm getting some error messages, probably because, well, no, the controller is compiled. So let's see what it was saying here. So just double check that I've got the right file here. Minutes, hours, days, fxml .fxml. That looks correct. Premature end of file. So it's kind of making it sound like there's something. Oh yeah. So yeah, I forgot to save. That's what I did. So you can see when I went to check my fxml file, it was blank. So I need to go over here and save. That's what I didn't do. All right, so let's just double check that. Yeah, that looks better. And so all right, so there we go. So that looks good so far. All right, next up on the controller. So what we need to do in the controller, right, is to, number one, get the text out of the minutes field. So I'm going to create a variable called minutes string, and that's going to be the name of the text field, which is minutesfield.getText. So that gets the text out of there. Next up, we need to convert that to a numeric type. I'm just going to convert it to a double, right? So double minutes equals, and then that's going to be double dot parse double, and then it's minutes string. So that converts the string version to the numeric double version. Next up, I need to do the calculations. I need to calculate hours. So that's just going to be minutes divided by 60. And then days is minutes divided by, and then so 60, and then times 24. That comes out to be 1440. Okay, and then so we made the calculations. Next up, what we want to do is set the days label. To days, and set the hours label to hours. All right, let's give that a shot and see how it goes. So it says incompatible types, double cannot be converted to string. So it doesn't like that that's a string. We're going to format it anyway, but for the time being, let's just do that. And maybe that'll fix the other one. Let's see. No. Hours label. Oh, I must so here you can see hours label. The type is set to pane right here. So that should be label. I probably messed that up in my fxml file. So I need to be careful about that. So looking over here in my fxml file, yeah, I set the fxid on the wrong thing over here. So I'm going to need to take this out of here, out of pane, and then put it in probably this one right here. So this is a little bit tricky. If you're doing this by hand, you might be better off just fixing it inside the fxml file itself instead of trying to do this by hand. But that's kind of a bad mistake that I just made there. Okay, so that looks like it worked okay. I had the same issue with hours. It's a double, and the argument to set text needs to be a string. So this will just make Java convert it to a string for the time being. But we'll go back and change that if all this works out. Okay. So I think it was 6,000, right? It was our test case here. And so we got 100 on the hours, that's right on target, and then 4.16 repeating right on the thing, and that will round up to 4.2 days if we round it to one decimal place there. So it looks like that's correct. So I fixed that issue with the fxml file. So I'm going to close this because if I change it, all right, and click do not save, it'll overwrite those changes that I just made by hand in the fxml file. So again, I probably was better off going back and doing it with Scene Builder. If I had gotten this wrong, then I would have had to keep messing around with it. And then if that didn't work out, then I'd be stuck in kind of a weird limbo where I'd have to go back and resave it over the Scene Builder. So again, if that happens to you, you probably need to go back to Scene Builder. Okay. So I'm going to close this out. All of that looks like it's working fine. I want it rounded right to one decimal place here. So let's go ahead and take care of that. That's going to be string.format. And then percent, comma, 0.1f. And then days. Same thing down here. String.format. Percent, comma, 0.1f. Hours. And then I think I need another parenthesis there. So that looks okay. And so now when I run it, and do the test case, 6,000, there we go. So I'm getting the correct values in there. All right, so one downside though to that is that if I enter some letters in here and hit enter, then you can see, right, it's gonna generate some exceptions when I do that, some runtime errors. And you can see that it says caused by I get a number format exception. And that is on the controller, if you look back here on line 21. So that's this line right here where I do this conversion. So what I want to do is put that in a try block and then put the conversion in here and then do catch. And then it was number format exception E. And then I could pop up an alert or do something else, but in this one I'm just going to set the days label to invalid input. And there might already also be some text in the hours label. So if there is, then I'm just gonna clear it out by setting the text to nothing in there. And then if you're gonna do it this way, then you need to return out of this, because if not, right, if you don't put that return there, it will keep trying to execute these statements right here. Whereas if you put the return, right, then it will stop executing any of these statements in the method. And that's what you want to do, because if you're in here in the catch block, that means something went wrong with minutes. So that means that these calculations, which depend on minutes, are, you know, probably not going to work the way you think they are. Now, when you try to compile that, you're going to get one other issue, right? It says error cannot find symbol, and that's because we put the declaration of minutes right here inside this block now, and so you can only use it inside that block. So what you need to do is declare it before you go into that block, and then it'll be available in the block of the method here in this block, so which is what we need down here. So that should fix that problem. Oh, I called it miles. It's minutes, right, on that one. Okay, and so now when we run this, we should not get that. If I do a successful conversion and then an unsuccessful one, you can see it clears out hours rather than leaving those numbers in there. So, okay, so far so good on this one. Converts to decimal hours, decimal days, done. Both rounded to one decimal place. Displays the results to the user. All that's done. It says the data entered by the user should be stored in the model class. So, and that's all we get. Remember, the model is the data manager for the application. And really all we've got are hours and days in this. This is a pretty simple app, right? So, so we just need a class, something like that, to store in the information, the data that's being passed around in the application. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go over and make another class. And have a couple of fields in there. Minutes. Actually, it's minutes, hours, and days, right? And then have get set methods for those. So public void set minutes. Okay, so now I have a place to store the data in a separate class away from the controller, away from the view, right? So a place for the data to go, a method to get some methods to get the data in there, right? And that's pretty much all we need here. We weren't given a lot of instructions on the model, right? But we have this separate class over here to store things in. So that's kind of not really the minimum, but for our purposes, the minimum. Okay, next up, we need to hook up the controller, right? The controller has to have some access to the model. Right now it doesn't. So we do that through a field in here. And so the controller now will have a reference, right, to the model, and so it can access it. And then whenever we get down to this point where we've successfully calculated all that stuff, then what we would do is to set those values in the model. And so now the data is actually residing some other place, right, in the app. All right, so we can compile that. Everything looks okay. So here the controller is handing the data off to the model when it's updated. And then, so let's run that. And we'll see we're going to encounter some problems when we do that. So if we go to do this, everything's going to be okay, right? It'll calculate. Actually, it didn't even get to that point where it calculated. That's kind of interesting. And here you can see it says cannot invoke the set minutes method because this dot model is null. Okay, so the model, right? We had a reference to it in the controller, but it was never set up. We never created a model object, right, and put it in there. Normally you would do that in the constructor, right? And but here, even if you take that approach and try and do it in the constructor, it's not going to work because we never create a controller object. If you think about it, right, where did we do that in our code? Did we do it over here in the main part of the app? No, we didn't, right? So we're kind of relying on the code that's underneath this in application. We're relying on it, right, to make the controller here. So it's how do we do that? I don't know, right? So there is another way to do that. Instead of just using the constructor, go and inside the controller, right, put a method, mark it with the @fxml tag, and it's public void initialize. So this initialize method, right, will get called by the underlying code and the application, and you can do stuff like initialize fields from there. So in that, right, we want to create a new minutes, hours, days model, like so. Now here, our model class, right, we didn't explicitly put a constructor in there. That means we're using the default constructor, but you certainly could, if you wanted to do that, set that up and do it that way. But in this example, we could, but we don't really need to. All right, so let's run it now and just verify that we're not getting those errors anymore. All right, so 6,000, press enter. You can see everything's back to normal, no errors down here, right? We're getting the correct values. The values were put into the model object, minutes, hours, days. We could verify that. And one of the ways in which you could verify that is to put a toString in this and then print it out and just verify. So sometimes the app doesn't look like it's doing a lot different than when we didn't have the model, but it is. And like I said, if you want to convince yourself of that, you can put a toString here and then print it out just to verify what's inside the model. So you can kind of look inside it that way. It's harder to do some of the things that we were doing in the earlier part of the semester with JGraphs, like using Canvas and things like that. There's probably a way to do it, but it's not as easy as it was before. All right, so I think that is it on this one.